Okay, welcome everyone to BlockRocket panel, Self-Sovereign Identity and Data Security on Blockchain, organized by Disrupt Network. So before the event starts, I quickly want to give you an introduction into the event logistics. So as this event is going to be big, everyone is going to be muted except for the speakers. If you have any question or suggestion during the talk, you can scan the QR code here and discuss in our WhatsApp group, and also stay in touch after the event. That is from my side. I wish you an enjoyable session, and I'll now hand over to Saga to introduce the speakers. Nice. Saga, do you want to start? Yeah.
Sure. Thanks, Alexandra. Thank you everyone for joining us in another panel event on self-sovereign identity and data security on blockchain. Before I start, I would like to quickly introduce about myself. So I'm head of venture development at BlockRocket. At BlockRocket, we are an early stage startup investor for blockchain-based startups in Germany, but any startup around the world can apply for our acceleration program. We invest up to 500,000 euro in terms of ticket size. We do seed investment. Once we invest into startup becomes part of our acceleration program, where we accompany them up to 24 months. During that time period, they receive advisory, mentorship, matchmaking, and marketing from our side. So this is our ecosystem. We have 300 plus partners around the world. We have our average ticket size is up to 150 to 250K, but as I said, maximum ticket size is 500,000 euro in terms of seed investment ticket. We do 5 to 10 startup investment per year, and we have 30 plus VCs in our network. We do 10 to 15 events per year, where we also educate our community based on the latest development in the blockchain space. So you can consider BlockRocket as in with other acceleration program where we are a highly blockchain focused and German ecosystem native. So you can see that our main focus is blockchain based startups investment in Germany. But as I said earlier, we also invest around the world. So basically any startup around the world working on blockchain space, they can apply for our acceleration program, but at least they should have a German ecosystem in their mind when they are launching their product. We have a sophisticated application process where it takes 4 to 6 weeks for any startup once they apply to our program, and we reach out to the investment decision within 4 to 6 weeks. So this is our team. Feel free to reach out to us if you are looking for investment or if you're working on the next big thing on the blockchain space. And now moving further, I have a really wonderful lineup of speakers coming from the SSID sector and blockchain space. So moving further, I would like to ask an individual speaker to introduce themselves. So let's start with Ankur from Checked.
Welcome, Ankur. I'm the CTO and co-founder at Checked. We are a self-sovereign identity or decentralized digital identity, the terms that you might have come across, network that has launched and gone live on mainnet recently. We are available, and we're building on the Cosmos ecosystem, but I've had a lot of experience building Ssi ecosystems over the past 5 to 6 years, along with my co-founder, Fraser Edwards. And I'm really looking forward to this discussion because I think identity is one of those things that really cuts across a lot of different topics and is, I think, crucial to adoption in the Web 3.0 ecosystem.
Thank you, Ankur, for the nice introduction. And once again, welcome to our panel event. Moving further, I would like to ask Barry. He's a senior vice president from Elliott Group. So Barry, introduce yourself.
Thank you, Sigar. Thank you for having me. Hi, everyone. Great to be here with you all. My name is Barry Herbst, based here in Manhattan, New York, in the United States. I'm the senior vice president with the Elliott Group. We are a consumer leading executive search firm working to build C-level teams across consumer brands around the world, focusing on C-level, VP, and board level placement. So it all comes down to humans, identity. That is the crux and core of what we do at Elliott, putting incredible C-level teams together. I'm also a cryptocurrency investor, advisor to numerous projects and companies in the space around the world. And I look forward to being here. And Sigar, thank you for having me again.
Thank you, Barry, good to see you again. And thanks for joining us, Barry. Moving further, we have Philip from SQ Solution.
Yes, hello. My name is Philipp Brune from SQ Solutions. We are a German startup based in Frankfurt, and we are a blockchain startup, but not, let's say, your usual blockchain startup. But so typically people, when you tell them you're a blockchain startup, then they always ask, okay, what you're using, Ethereum or Hyperledger or something like that. We use our own blockchain technology. We see blockchain as not so much as a tech framework that is there, but it's like a high-level data structure, a distributed high-level append-only database. And we are using that for building applications for, let's say, clients who are not typical blockchain clients, but maybe want to explore the technology to actually make use of new things. So our blockchain is kind of meta blockchain that is able to connect to various other blockchains like Ethereum or crypto or whatever, but it's not our business. We're trying to bring together traditional enterprise applications with blockchain technology and connect them to the blockchain that are out there. So distributed identities and security are very crucial for us and an important field where we would be able to connect to different approaches and integrate them to provide value to our customers. So my role in the company is I'm the CTO, and we're just a very early startup. We started this year, but we already grew a lot, and I think that the next years will be very exciting.
Thank you, Philip, for the wonderful introduction. Now, moving further, we have Johannes from Fraunhofer Institute. He's the PhD scholar, and he's also deeply working in SSI project. So I would like to ask Johannes to introduce.
Yeah, hi, everyone. I'm a PhD student at University of Bayreuth and also a researcher at Fraunhofer Blockchain Lab. So I have advised several SSI and blockchain projects in the public and private sector, mainly mobility and energy. And so I'm trying to build innovative solutions based on decentralized technologies like SSI and blockchain, and to look at potential challenges in adoption. So mainly from an energy consumption, scalability, and privacy perspective. And that's why I find SSI particularly interesting, because it's closely related to blockchain, but on the other hand, it also avoids the storage of sensitive information on a blockchain, and so can have good impact on blockchain solutions too.
Yes, indeed. Thanks a lot, Johannes, for the introduction. So recently we have seen that the SSID product, the thing, like the buzzword is already in the heated. So like everyone is talking about like self-sovereign identity. So today we are going to deep dive into the idea of SSID. We are also going to explore the question for like, what are the SSIDs? What are the factors necessitating the SSIDs? The advantage of SSIDs, the difference between centralized SSIDs and decentralized SSID. On top, we are also going to discuss about data security on blockchain. So we are like an expert coming from the industry. So I would like to open the question to Ankur. So let's start with what is SSID? What do you mean by the SSID? If you can explain.
That's a very good question. And often, like, you know, the terminology itself is quite complex to understand within the industry on this. So self-sovereign identity is basically the idea that if you had information about yourself that was stored online that is currently traditionally stored in centralized systems, the same way that somebody might have a bank account with a specific bank, they might have a Facebook account or a Google account or a Twitch account. On a lot of these online services, your data is held and stored and held within a silo within these organizations. And although you can export the data out under GDPR rules in a lot of instances, it's not very easy to take that across somewhere else in a format that's easily understood. So what self-sovereign identity does is it's a way of like making data portable and understandable when you take it across different places. And one of the analogies that I give about this is, if you think of a passport or a driver's license, which is a physical document that you hold in your hand, it's issued perhaps by some organization, in this case, the government. You have control on whom you go and show these different documents. And they're often in a standardized format, which makes it easy for the recipient of the information to see, oh, okay, so that field means it's your last name, that field means it's your first name, this is your date of birth, because that's also quite important. Like the person that you're showing it to needs to be able to understand it. And fundamentally, that is what SSI is. It's a copy of your information that you control. You can decide whom you go and show it to. And quite crucially, unlike most other different blockchain use cases, you typically don't store this information written onto a blockchain itself. And that's because, let's say in the context of personal information, you don't want to be putting personal information onto a blockchain where you cannot go and remove that in the future. You might have consented to it now, but you may want to revoke consent in the future, and you can't do that because there's a copy of it that's out there. So what's quite interesting in the SSI space often, which doesn't necessarily need to use blockchain, is the fact that you have a copy of the information on blockchain, but there are trust elements that are stored perhaps either on a blockchain or a non-blockchain system.
Understood. So Johannes, would you like to add something here, like how the combination of SSID and blockchain works?
Yeah, sure. So maybe to add on Ankur's statement. So for me, many SSI solutions have the notion of something like a digital wallet, which basically is this kind of storage that I own and where I can store information and reveal it at any time because I'm basically in control of it. And so I think the notion of SSI and the idea of having a digital wallet is very closely related to blockchain technology because, well, in the beginning, we owned some coins with our digital wallet and people thought that, well, we could do this with our identities as well. And now there are different technical implementations of SSI. And I think the simplest one wouldn't use a blockchain because you really just need digital signatures to make data verifiable. Like, for example, a digital equivalent of a driver's license or a passport. So you want the signature of the government on it, and then you can basically show it to anybody else. And if they know the government's public key, they can verify the authenticity of the information. And so initially, blockchains have been used also basically instead of a digital signature for hashing these certificates and making them verifiable by a hash that's stored on a blockchain. But as I said, you don't need to do that. And it's potentially also a problem because this hash value is highly correlatable. And if you show it in every interaction, then, well, people know more about you than you want, potentially. But blockchains, so this is basically the fully decentralized part of digital identities, I would say. So you have bilateral interactions. I don't need any third party to accept basically that I want to show something to someone else. We can do that bilaterally. The signature can also be verified bilaterally. But the question is, okay, how do people know which signatures or which public keys refer to which entities? And so today we use centralized systems for this, which is certificate authorities. So they basically write telephone books that associate institutions' public keys with the institution. And so I see a lot of ecosystems that use a blockchain instead, where basically instead of one institution that writes the telephone book, there is collaboration on maintaining the telephone book with specific write accesses and so on. And so essentially a blockchain is used for the governance of the SSI ecosystem and for having information about issuers, so those that sign these identity documents, and to have that in a less centralized way. And so I think the future will show whether the centralized approach like CA succeeds or the decentralized approach with blockchains succeeds, because I think to date, no blockchain-based SSI ecosystem has scaled to a size that would allow us to answer these questions. But I could also very well imagine that in the future, there will be a coexistence of centralized certificate authorities, for example, for government-issued IDs, and also decentralized systems where, for example, different enterprises collaborate on having such a basically mapping of public keys to institutions.
Understood. Thanks, Johannes. I think your last question, Ankur can very well answer, but we are not Ankur, I will come back to you, right? But as Johannes mentioned earlier, so my next question to Philip is as Johannes mentioned that previously or right now we are storing our coins on wallet, right? And then now everyone is talking about we can also store our identity on blockchain in our wallet, right? So what kind of data security blockchain does offers? And I mean, why should we trust the blockchain when it comes to data security?
Okay, so I think that's a good point. And so maybe a first comment on the data security thing. So as I said in the beginning, in the introduction, what we are doing is kind of considering blockchain as a distributed data store, a distributed append-only database that is decentralized, doesn't require a central party. And so I think it's always important to emphasize that, because regarding security on blockchain, the question is always which blockchain you're talking about. Do you talk about public or private blockchain? Is it permissioned or non-permissioned or whatever? So most of the public discussion is usually going around some crypto-like or Ethereum-like networks, which are usually public and therefore they have completely different problems than that we would have in a enterprise blockchain world. So regarding storing identities or storing, let's say, the public keys for the identities, or storing maybe also person-related information on the blockchain, I can only say that it's definitely possible to build a blockchain that is kind of privacy aware in that sense. And that is what we actually do. Our blockchain system is able even to delete information if you want. Of course, this is kind of going beyond the traditional idea of a blockchain, and it's maybe not a blockchain in its original sense, but it's I think it's a natural evolution of the thing towards realistic use cases, I would say. And so our blockchain offers that kind of multi-tenancy support and full encryption on the blockchain, and you can definitely store information securely on the chain. It depends on which chain and in which setting, I would say. So that for enterprise context, I think that it is definitely possible to build that in a way that is privacy aware and GDPR compliant and also secure for the user. So it is possible not only to store the public keys, but also maybe more information of the user on such a system. In particular, if you also make use of kind of hardware encryption mechanisms that ensure that the nodes in your chain are also kind of not tangible by third parties or by the administrators. For that purpose, we are exploring the IBM Linux One pervasive encryption hardware, which is actually providing exactly that, a fully encrypted system that has the key in hardware you cannot steal, you cannot destroy. And with such systems, you can get the level of a distributed blockchain security to a level that is much better than that of a centralized system, because the typical centralized systems have the disadvantage of not being decentralized, of not having distributed people controlling each other and so on. So I would say that or distributed organizations controlling each other using the blockchain, over the blockchain. So I think security on the blockchain is not a general problem. It can be really done to a very high extent. The question is which blockchain and how do you do it? And so in that sense, I would say it is not a question if you use a blockchain for storing the information or a centralized system. It's a way how the implementation is done. And I can only say we could do it in a way that is absolutely secure, and that could be an approach for building secure environments. But I completely agree with the thing that Johannes said before. The most secure way is if you don't store your key anywhere, you have it at home. I mean, it's like on your PC or whatever. But of course, there are different steps. The best thing is probably to have it in a hardware device that you have to have physically, and then like a hardware security module or something, and then you can, or a chip card, and you can then assign things. And then of course, if you move on, if you think about storing it not only at home, I would say, okay, a decentralized approach in general is better than a centralized, because it creates more trust. It makes things independent of single organizations and single parties, even governments. And I think that is something that you really need to have it kind of accepted also, let's say, cross nationwide and so on.
Understood. Ankur, you want to add something here, right?
Honestly, I forgot that like Barry hasn't spoken yet. So like maybe you go to him first, and then we can start the discussion amongst all the speakers.
Sure. No worries. I mean, of course, I will ask. My next question would be to Barry, but Ankur and all the other speakers, please keep in mind if you have some really important topic to discuss in between, then feel free to take the lead. Just raise the hand, then I will give you time, right? Just a short notice to all the audience. Like my colleague Alexandra put the chat box, like some of the links for the WhatsApp group. So if you have some question, feel free to go there and post it down your question. I will take some questions definitely by end of the panel event today, if the question is relevant, of course. So moving to the Barry, why do individuals' identity and data security matters? Why do you think like for example, I was doing like podcast with Woodstock Fund, like founding partner Pranav, and he did some research in USA. Like he was asking individuals like, would you like to, how much money you would like to trade for like your identity? So none of them were agree. Like they don't want to trade their identity, of course, because it's your identity, which is far way beyond than the money you receive, right? So why do you think as an investor, like individuals' identity matters?
Yeah, it's a great question. Great question, Sagar. And let's all just remember, you know, whether you're a near trillionaire like Elon Musk or you're, you know, in it's horrible in deep poverty, we all have an identity. And that is something that we all have to remember. We are all bound by we all have a collective identity, but also an individual identity that must be protected at all costs, whether from hackers, government intrusion, government overreach, whatever it might be. And that is that one thing that I believe is that keeps us sovereign. The key word here is sovereign. We have ownership over ourselves, over our bodies, but also our name, our beliefs, our attributes, characteristics, anything that makes us, anything that really keeps us unique and special. So this question, Sagar, that you ask is critical about, well, why is data security, why is the individual identity important to us? If we don't have that individual identity, we are nobody. If someone takes our identity, who are we? There's no way to prove who we are, especially when we look at, for example, you know, look at all the hacks going across the world, data hacks. You know, I remember when the ledger, probably, I think it was 500,000 names were leaked accidentally. Ledger was hacked, and 500,000 names, addresses, phone numbers were all leaked. Imagine the cleanup that has to happen as a result, but how do individuals protect themselves? So I think if all of this information is stored on a blockchain, which of course, as we know, is tamper-proof, then that at least gives each individual that confidence that they are safe at night, that their data is safe at night. And that's very, very critical.
Thanks, Barry. I think you raised a really wonderful point about like tamper-proof and the ledger things, what they're like a breach of like 500,000 contact details. And I think that will just go, and that identity will just change the hands. And we can also see that lots of vendors are selling their identity or the data in the secondary market for some cash. But moving back to like Ankur, so like Philip Philip discussed about like private and public blockchain, right? As you checked, is also like you start with like Hyperledger Indy and then you move to like Cosmos. So why this terminology first with the private blockchain, then you suddenly move to the public blockchain, and on top you also open source your mainnet, right? So if you can tell more about us, I mean, the reason behind this to doing so.
Yeah, no, sure, can do. And I think for context, like, you know, when we are talking about the private blockchain that Sagar mentioned, it's a blockchain platform called Hyperledger Indy. I know Hyperledger often gets interchangeably used as terminology for Hyperledger Fabric, but there is actually a whole family of like different blockchains and blockchain products under the Hyperledger Foundation. And one of them was called Hyperledger Indy, which is probably one of the most popular frameworks or blockchains to be used within the SSI space. Just to take an example, for instance, it's being used in the UK within the hospital and the National Health Service sector. It's being used in Germany by the ID Union consortium as well for identity within the German ecosystem, as well as like a couple of others that we've worked on. So Fraser, my co-founder, for instance, worked on a project with the World Economic Forum. The thing about Hyperledger Indy that we found, and when we started, like, you know, my experience has primarily also been in Hyperledger Indy, it really is one of those sort of path-breaking platforms that really brought about like SSI as a concept and introduced it to people. But the challenge is it was designed before a lot of the standards on SSI got written. And so therefore, like, there are aspects of it which are perhaps not as cutting edge as the rest of, like, you know, the developments that have been happening in this space. The second reason is as a private permission blockchain, the way that Hyperledger Indy works is that it's quite restricted in how many nodes you can have as a maximum and a minimum. So you basically have to stay within a small range of 7 to 25 nodes. And if you go beyond those limits, essentially the blockchain consensus mechanism collapses. So we ran sort of like our own sort of like analysis and like, traffic, like, load metrics on it. And what we really wanted to look at is, can we go past those limits, and can we improve the performance perhaps to something that scales a lot better? But quite separately, we started tackling the problem around how do you make self-sovereign identity commercially viable? And so when we started looking at that challenge, we started looking at like, how could you monetize certain kinds of transactions that happen in self-sovereign identity? I think not all of them. I think there are some basic concepts that need to remain free and a public utility, but there are certain interactions that we thought could be monetized. Because having participated or like worked across a lot of SSI projects, I know this is an issue. Projects get to the pilot stage, or projects get to some kind of proof of concept stage, and then people start asking, but how does this actually work as a business? Why should I give somebody a copy of the data that they can keep and they can go and show to others? That's fantastic for my competitors. Why is it great for me? So yeah, it's like Sagar's life is easier, but it does not do anything for me as a company. And so when we started looking at that particular challenge, we really looked at like, what else is happening in the blockchain ecosystem? Is there something that can really easily integrate into things like DEXs, things like wallets, things like everything else that's happening in the Web 3.0 ecosystem? And that's why we decided to go down using the Cosmos blockchain route. Now, I am not particularly a zealot about a specific blockchain. I think there are means to an end. We picked Cosmos because it was the most mature platform with a lot of open source libraries available that we could leverage to speed ourselves up. But I think the fundamental problem of solving identity in Web 3.0 exists regardless. And so our broad vision is interoperability and working across blockchain as well as non-blockchain forms of SSI. And that's why we open sourced our stuff as well.
Understood, Ankur. So moving to further to Johannes, I think Johannes also worked on Hyperledger Indy, but I would like to ask him more about applications of SSID on blockchain. If you can tell us like sector-wise, like how it can influence e-commerce sector, IoT, or like energy sector.
Yeah, thanks. So I think, as Ankur also mentioned in the beginning, we have identities for people, we have identities for organizations, and we have identities for machines. And I think we can observe that all three of them are being utilized in different use cases. So identities for organizations are also a prerequisite of identities for machines and individuals, in my opinion, because typically it's organizations that issue credentials that say, well, this machine was manufactured by me, this person had a job, and I saw certain skills and so on. So we need these identities for trustworthy institutions, and they can then issue credentials to machines and to people. And identities for organizations can also be used for authenticating organizations with each other, and then, for example, interchanging data. So for example, in Gaia X, this is also being explored so that two enterprises can agree on each other. Well, we know who you are, we know who you are, and we now want to interchange data with each other, and we know that the other entity can be held accountable because we know who they are. So I think this is one major application. Identities for machines. So I'm mainly aware of this in the energy and mobility sector. For example, digital identities for vehicles. So vehicles can talk to each other, for example, on a highway when they do not have the latency to call home and wait for an answer, and then, for example, get an accept that they are allowed to talk to the other vehicle. In the energy sector, it's very interesting for renewable energy assets, for example. So they can automatically register at a market. They can prove that they are, for example, a wind power plant, and so they are generating green energy, which can be sold differently. So proving all kinds of attributes about the asset itself. And for people, I think it's closest also by the projects of, for example, the German ministries. And there, I think it's very interesting to combine different credentials from different contexts in one presentation. So for example, today, if I want to visit an event, well, I need to show the event ticket. I probably need to show the vaccination passport. And if the controls are well done, then I need my passport as well. And so I basically, typically the passport is in physical form, the vaccination certificate is on my smartphone, and the event ticket is either on the smartphone or on paper. And now the poor people at the entrance, well, they need to check that the name on all these three coincides, and they need to check all of them individually. And so this can be made much easier with SSI because you just have 3 digital credentials in your wallet and you just combine them and show a part of each of the 3. And you prove that essentially, for example, the name on the 3 of them is the same one. And so this can make a lot of registration processes, for example, also in e-commerce much easier. So today I have to choose between a very convenient login with PayPal. And so my payment is via PayPal, and PayPal is involved in any interaction in e-commerce that I'm doing. And the smaller businesses, for them, it's challenging to participate. But if I could just register with one click and essentially reveal all of the information that I need for the checkout, so credit card information, address information, and my name, for example, then I could also do a checkout with one click at an e-commerce website where I've never been before. And so this can in some way level the playing field also in e-commerce, in my opinion. And that's why I'm very curious to see what the European Union is going to do with their digital wallet initiative, because I think this will also, to a large extent, shape the current progress in SSI. So will they use a blockchain-based solution or not? Will they use X509 certificates, or will they rather use verifiable credentials? So I'm very curious to see into which direction this will go. And I think they will need to decide quite soon, because the timeline of the European identity wallet is very ambitious.
Understood. Definitely. Also on top, I would like to add here, Johannes, like as you mentioned, like event, when at the door of the event, it's also about the data validation. Like, so they are the validator. So either they want to go with the student ID card or like driving license, or like they want to control like at the higher level, then they will ask for your passport, right? And the second thing I would like to add, which is like also like tamper-proof. So like on SSID, on blockchain or online digital identity, there is the chances that your data might get tampered. Let's say like the person is like trying to falsify their personal identity, and that thing we definitely need to take care of it, like that the person who is showing the identity, which is actually real or not. Because let's say like there is no collaboration between like government or that event organizer that we will accept the passport of any individual country, but that's by default, right? And that thing we have to establish in the SSID on blockchain. So I mean here, that's all I wanted to say. Ankur, you wanted to say something here. Would you like
very
to add?
quick?
Yeah, please keep it short, like within 1 minute. Yeah.
Very other quick example is the International Air Transport Association, Ayata, which is the global association of all airlines. So they've done something called the Ayata Travel Pass on proving COVID test results and vaccination records when traveling internationally. I've traveled a couple of times back and forth over the summer, past couple of months in Europe. And the typical way that you prove everything today is printouts of paper and PDFs. So, which can easily be faked. And you can't really sort of like, you know, it's all hanging on together by a thread. And what the SSI in this context allows is, it allows like airlines, and it allows like passengers to have like a digital copy of those records that's tamper-proof, and you can show in the context of traveling across borders.
Sure, Barry, please go ahead.
I just want to add, I think the key word here that we're all alluding to is reputation. I think it's very, very important. You know, look, a lot of these chains, I mean, we all have a reputation. Now, the question is this reputation going to be something tangible, something that you could see in the form of a credit score? I'm an advisor to a biometric platform called Ayata, based in Singapore. and they have created a credit score in addition to their biometric platform to access sensitive, whether it's a crypto wallet that they're creating or something else. They've created a credit score by which good actors, of course, have a much higher score than bad actors. And I believe Encore and Check are partnered with Ayata. So as far as the technicals behind that, of course, Encore is more in the know about what's happening behind the scenes, but that credit score is really going to be integral to an individual's honesty, integrity, and reputation.
Understood. Philip, of course, I'm coming back to you then. And I think we discussed about like various applications. And now coming back to you on the question, like how we can store the data securely on blockchain, right? I mean, is there any even like 0.001% of chance that that data will be like leaked from the blockchain or like a data provider? So like, what are the best way to secure the data on blockchain? So like it can also comply with GDPR, and it can also individually secure like individual's identity.
Okay, so I would say it depends on the cryptographic system or cryptographic algorithms used. And of course, there's now a lot of discussion. I mean, the way to protect data on the blockchain or to reveal it to only those parties that you want to is basically to encrypt it and to use digital signatures, as we already heard, digital public-private key schemes and so on. And then it, of course, strongly depends on the algorithm used, if this is secure or not, or how secure it is, because, of course, there is a risk that at some point quantum computers will be able to at least decode certain protocols, like, for example, the original RSA algorithm. So it is important to use algorithms that are presumably quantum resistant. And I think that there will be, of course, more and more of these things developed in the future. But we already today can, of course, use more sophisticated algorithms than just pure old RSA or something like that. And the second thing, of course, is to, I mean, the system, of course, there's always a chance that there's a bug in the software. And to actually also ensure that this is not fatal, I would, as I said already, what we are exploring is using a hardware encryption that is on a additional layer. So we encrypt the data on the blockchain, and we encrypt the full node on the hardware so that it is also protected from its own administrators. And these things could help to make it less and less probable that someone is able to steal the data. But I mean, there is no, I mean, to have a fully zero probability of data leakage, you would have to have kind of a formal proof of the full software, and that is usually not feasible. So I think we will have, there's always a risk, but we can get it down to, let's say, a value that is lower than any kind of let's say probable event, or you would have to wait so long that it's not relevant. So I think that is possible. It depends on the technologies and the algorithms and the implementations you use, to use elaborate frameworks, use enterprise-ready technologies, use the right and maybe not so I say not so well-known platforms, to use technologies that are really focusing on security, and that is possible. And I think that especially for such kind of, let's say, critical information like you would store for like personal identities, I would say this is important. On the other hand, of course, that's a point that came to my mind in the previous discussion. The question is, and I think that's really important to have a success, to really get out self-sovereign identities to the clients, to the customer, to the mass market for B2C. I think you need to have an offering that is kind of widely accepted, probably is free, that is easily to integrate in different platforms. Like today, Google ID or these things are doing it, and they basically do it for free, but of course they earn the money from collecting the data that you provide them by logging in. But the question is, can we build a replacement for that is really like a community thing that is free and decentralized and so on? And will it be accepted by the customers, as there are already solutions that are widespread? So I think this is a big issue. It's not so much a technology issue, it's an issue for adoption. How do we get such a system to be used by many people. I don't see the problem really in for machines or let's say special situations, cars talking to each other where you have a certain business case. This is kind of a B2B scenario, but I think that's fine. But for the mass market, I think we have to see if there will be something like authenticating by Facebook or Google or whatever in a decentralized way, and how would it work as a business model? I don't really, I would look forward to that, how that could go.
Understood, Philip. Ankur, please go ahead if you would like to add something here.
Yeah, very quick one. And this is the original comment that I wanted to make. I think Philip makes some really good points on using hardware sort of like, techniques for encryption as well, which increases certain aspects of the how the cryptography is implemented, as well as, using all of the very sensible techniques that he's talking about. However, what I'm going to disagree perhaps is a bit controversial, but what I'm going to disagree very hard on is never store personal data on a blockchain, even if it's encrypted. And I'll give you a reason why. The reason is it doesn't matter how good your encryption is now, because encryption standards get outdated basically every 5 years. So even if you look at like very standard things like HTTPS or TLS, like what was the best cryptography standard a couple of years ago may now be considered outdated. And sometimes it's not because the cryptography standard is bad, but because the implementation of it on certain systems was inaccurate. And so while in a traditional centralized system, you could go re-encrypt that with the updated encryption standards or the implementations, you cannot do that on a blockchain. And so therefore, if for whatever reason, if you have like, bugs that come out in particular encryption standards or in how the implementation of it was carried out, that's a huge security risk. Having said that, like I think the techniques that Philip describes to keep the signatures of issuers on blockchain is a fantastic idea.
Understood. So now moving further, I think there are two great questions coming from the audience. Before I ask, I would like to go anyway, it was in the topic like interoperability on SSI, and the second was like GDPR. So I think the Ankur, the first question very well suits you, that our community, one of the participants asked how far do you think is the interoperability topic? We have like Indy on the one side, the oldest SSI solution, but in lack of maintenance. On the other side, we have like W3C and DIF with the IDs and VC standards. If you would like to answer this question.
Yeah, sure. Very quickly, I'd say I think there's more than 100 plus decentralized ID methods now. It's insane, but that's fine. I see it exactly the same way as like there's more than 1,000 or tens of thousands of different hosting providers around the world, and yet you can type in a browser address into your browser, and you can go visit any website, regardless of like where they're hosting it. And I think that's precisely the kind of interoperability we need to move into the SSI world. People aren't going to download 50 or 100 different wallet applications because they're talking across on unique different systems. And so while it is a challenge, because I think it's the early stages of like a lot of the SSI efforts, I think there's been some fantastic work within the community, within W3C, within DIF, on how this kind of interoperability can actually be carried out in real life. And we are starting to see some of the first aspects of that come out through things like Hyperledger Aries, which we've been working with as well. And I think it's just going to take a lot of effort within the open source community to get the implementations right. So, and my sort of like, hope is that one day I can download any different wallet application and be able to import in and export out any kind of information. What I think is quite interesting is that the mobile operating system vendors like Apple and Google are increasingly starting to think about things like this. While they're not using SSI, they're starting to look at how you could store identity credentials as well in Apple Wallet or Google Pay Wallet. And I think that is when it will become quite interesting, when it has native operating system level support on the devices that we use the most.
Understood. Thanks, Ankur. For our audience, I'm just sharing the German Blockchain Award, like annual Blockchain Award we host at BlockRocket. which is like 2021 German Blockchain Award. And if you guys haven't RSVP or like sign up for the event, please do so. We have like a great lineup of startups participating, like 30 startups in 3 different categories. And on top, we have like 10 plus like VC, jury members coming from prominent crypto industry, like a founder of Matic, Polygon, and several other prominent names coming from around the world. So please sign up, limited tickets only. And now moving further, I would like to ask like a second question to Johannes, which is like GDPR issues, right? If you read the question, like how can you regulate a trust when the network is permissionless? In the Europe, you normally need someone who is responsible for data processing, like GDPR. So more like a proof of authority instead of proof of stake. So any comments on this one, Johannes?
Yeah, so I think Ankur already mentioned that the data that you do process on a blockchain shouldn't be sensitive anymore, which means that the very moment you process sensitive information that is subject to GDPR, you have probably already made a mistake. And so I think the more interesting question is it easier to govern an SSI ecosystem, basically trusted lists of credential issuers that basically are a suggestion, so which universities in the world are trustworthy regarding the issuance of diplomas, which car manufacturers are trustworthy, and so on. Should we govern this in a centralized way, so certificate authorities, in a permission system like Hyperledger Indy or the European Blockchain Services Infrastructure, or should we use permissionless blockchains like, for example, Cosmos, Tezos, and there are a lot of other examples where already DID resolvers are in place. And I think, so the Hyperledger Indy ecosystem, they already thought about having, for example, a token, support for payment, and so on quite early. And they decided against this for a lot of reasons. And so while I think that at this stage, that was a good idea, using a permissioned blockchain also makes it difficult for open innovation to essentially get new ideas and interact with such a solution that governs the ecosystem. And I think that's what makes it interesting for permissionless blockchains, because you could essentially set up a smart contract that works similarly like a DAO, where you essentially accumulate reputation, where you have multi-signature processes that decide how trustworthy an entity is, and where you essentially set up the rules on how the telephone book is managed within the smart contract. And by using a permissionless blockchain, it gets interesting because other building blocks of decentralized finance, other DAOs, whatever, can interact with this. And there is no need to restrict it because, well, you set the reputation within the SSI system, and whoever wants to connect to this or use it as well, well, they can just do that. And I think one of the main reasons that this has not happened yet, for example, on Ethereum, is just the transaction fees are too high. That's why I think it may be very interesting to use a, well, bigger permissionless blockchain with a lot of different sub-chains that are interconnected and where you can get lower transaction fees. So that's why I, for example, find a Cosmos-based solution very interesting. And I think that it just gives more freedom for innovation, which has already proven very successful in DeFi. And we could imagine that this innovation could also bring SSI a step further ahead.
Johan, actually, we call this the Elon Musk problem because on Ethereum, everything is running across the same chain. Something happening, blowing up in the Bored Ape Society or like the NFT world is going to jack up your prices for whatever you're doing on chain. So that's precisely one of the reasons why we wanted to decouple like the external factors that might cause like price volatility. Also, I posted like just on the side, I think how the trust of how a credential gets accepted is kind of unlinked from the permissionless nature to an extent of how the network itself runs for the stuff that's happening on Ledger. Because the same way that in person, when you show somebody a paper document, they can choose whether they want to trust it or not. It's fundamentally the same thing happens in the digital world.
Definitely, but I would like to ask like next question to Philip. What do you mean by data encryption and data validation on blockchain? And please feel free to go ahead if you would like to add something here, what Ankur and Johannes just mentioned.
All right, thanks. What do I mean by data encryption? So by data encryption, I mean that the payload data on the chain is encrypted. Of course, what you can't encrypt are all the information that is used to kind of verify the sender of a transaction or something. That at least like the keys and so on, they are not encrypted. But the payload data, I mean the data that is actually stored on the chain, can be encrypted and only with the public key of the sender, and can be decrypted by only by those parties that are kind of able to actually decrypt it with. No, it's encrypted with the public key of the receiver, so that only the receiver can decrypt it with the private key. Sorry, and yeah, so that's kind of a way to store it. And as long as we don't think that the public-private key scheme itself is tempered, this data is not readable to anyone. Okay, and yeah, so I think that so far, but that I mean by data encryption on the chain. But you, as I said, the meta information, like the transaction ID and the sender ID and so on, they are not encrypted, and that of course, even if you can read the content, it still allows you to see maybe who was sending something, and that of course is always the metadata is visible, and that of course allows a lot of analysis too. So that it's always a question if you can accept that or not. And in a let's say permission scenario where you have kind of an enterprise blockchain with a certain consortium of parties, this is typically something that you could negotiate, or that needs to be defined in advance, but then it's not a problem. But for a public blockchain, this of course is interesting to analyze what people are doing, and therefore I think that I'm not absolutely sure if a public or permissionless system that is accessible to everyone would be the right place to handle digital identities, in particular because you could at least track down who is the activity of the parties, and that is something that needs to be carefully understood. And therefore, I think maybe the interesting thing is like more like a kind of consortium of trusted parties that provide this service to the community, or to I don't know, anyone. And yeah, so that would be one thought. And yeah, what was the other? You said data encryption. I think I commented
and
on
validation.
That. Data validation. Yeah. So data validation. I mean, a blockchain per default is kind of allowing it's tamper-proof, so you can always check that the data is valid in that sense, as the data is the same data as it has been stored on the chain, because you have the hash values that you can just check at any time compared to the other nodes and see, okay, if there's something wrong or not. So you have a kind of a checksum and a hash on the data at any point in time. So it's the data itself is validatable by the system. Of course, it cannot be validated what is in there. I mean, that's kind of you have to trust the person that stored it there, but since it has been stored, it is not tampered, that you can prove, and that is what the blockchain ensures to you. And I think that's a very important feature to have, let's say, the secure and also non-tangible or non-tamper-proof storage. And that, I think, is the general feature of the blockchain database itself. So that is the reason maybe why it makes sense to store kind of identity information on a blockchain and not on another place.
Understood. Thanks, Philip. Moving further, I would like to ask, which is like a recent buzzword, right? Everyone knows about metaverse. So, Barry, coming back to you, what is your take on metaverse when it comes to SSID? So, how SSID will play a vital role in metaverse?
It's a really good question, and I think actually the metaverse is going to spur mass adoption, not only within. Well, the metaverse is going to bring mass adoption to the blockchain, and eventually to SSID. A challenge that I see is, someone's tangible life, their real life, like we are speaking now, flesh and blood, could be different from their metaverse life, different avatar, different name, et cetera, different identity. But I do think that we're going to see an increased amount of even just knowledge and education when it comes to SSID because of the metaverse. you know, the metaverse and NFTs are kind of a reawakening, if you will, of the subconscious when it comes to what technologies are out there, especially as many people are still home. People are exploring, well, what are some alternative investments I can get into? Oh, look at these NFTs. I see my favorite celebrities, you know, with their PFP projects and going into the metaverse, and you know, Snoop Dogg doing stuff on OpenSea and all this. I think that's really going to be, you know, people are going to say, oh, gee, look, I can have a different life on the metaverse, but also how do I protect my data? How do I ensure that that information is protected? Currently, I see, and you know, I invested in a company 3 years ago called Evernym, and I thought 3 years ago, 3 years from then, that you know, SSID would be the trend. Now, obviously, I'm thrilled the metaverse is the trend. I think that lack of education has been a lack of education, but especially a lack of education on what blockchains are and what the benefits are to society. Why people are still learning about at a very, very base layer what SSID is and how could it be just a value add. So as far as Sagar, your question on the metaverse, I think that, look, I'll just reiterate again, we're going to see a mass influx of people to the blockchain, to SSID because of the metaverse, which is great. I love it.
Thanks, Barry, for like point it down. Before I ask like the last you just have to answer in 2-3 words, but I would like to ask all of speaker here, like please post your LinkedIn if you would like to post it here, post your LinkedIn link here or your company respectively, so like our audience can connect you with, and if they have some question they can also reach out to you later on. And now moving further, like Ankur, I would like to also hear your opinion. So like about like metaverse, and then I will ask like in last 2 minutes, like also like that's like a 2-3 word question, but that I will ask later on. So please go ahead, like Philip, Johannes, and Ankur, if you would like to add something here on metaverse and SSID. Sure. And please feel free to take your time. Yeah.
I'll take a very quick one, which is I think the metaverse is super exciting. Like, obviously, we've been talking in the SSID world about like, hey, you can show your passports. That doesn't get people excited. But like you make a Bored Ape, which costs like $5 million. There are like Discord servers you can only get into if you have certain Bored Apes. Like, it's gotten people excited about reputation systems in Web 3.0. And I think that's quite good. The second piece, though, is how do you know it came from the real artist? How do you know it belongs to the right person? How do you know that, like, I didn't just create this Bored Ape and then mint it like 50 different times on 50 different blockchains, because none of them know or talk to each other. So I could just sell you the same stuff again and again. So I think there are aspects of like authenticity and provenance and originality that come in that perhaps is where like I don't see SSI in clash with it. I think I see it in parallel to it. I think the format through which NFTs are exchanged is fantastic. That should be on Ledger. But like there are certain aspects of like proving that can be off Ledger. And I think that's a very powerful combination. And more broadly in the metaverse, it would be fantastic if you could take digital assets that you own in one ecosystem or one game or one thing along to another one. And SSI really enables that portability.
Sure. Thanks, Ankur. Philip or Johannes, we have like a really we are in time limit. So please take 30 to 40 seconds if you would like to answer.
Yeah, I would just want to say, I think I would agree with the previous statement that it's not kind of replacing it. It exists in parallel, and I think that I mean, we have to see how it evolves, but I would not say that it is directly like a competition to SSID approaches in general, because I mean it's open and decentralized, and I think that should be the way how it is done. And in particular in Europe, we should think about kind of our own initiatives and things to do that.
I also completely agree with the need for verifiable information about, for example, the entity that creates an image that is then tokenized and so on. And I think not only from a provenance perspective, but also from a regulatory compliance perspective, SSI is very interesting for tokenization, because at some stage, I think tax authorities will become interested in what's happening in metaverse. And I think you really want to be able to prove, for example, that you made sure that some transaction is fine with the tax office, but you don't want to reveal all the personal information about yourself, because this is obviously a bit too transparent to do. And so the selective disclosure capabilities that come with a lot of the SSI frameworks are, in my opinion, crucial. To prove that I'm over 18 to buy a certain token, to prove that I'm in a certain nationality, that I'm allowed to do a transaction. I think all these interactions where you need cryptographically verifiable identity documents and authorizations, I think this is very important.
Thanks, Johannes. So my last question, which is like, like you just have to give it an answer. Like, so how far we can see, like within like 6 months, 1 year, or like 2 years, like all the events organizers or like all the government entity will start accepting SSIDs. So let's start with like Philip, then Ankur, Johannes, and Barry. You can just give the time frame, like how long does it take?
Well, at least if I look at Germany, I would presume it will, especially for the public authorities, it will still take long. So because I mean we take long for everything, and all the new initiatives have kind of, I mean we did not even manage to have a digital ID card that is widely accepted now, like personal ID or something, in a traditional approach. So I think that it's 5 to 10 years, I would say.
Thanks, Philip. Ankur, please keep it short. Like just give the number.
I'm probably going to say it's 2 years, 18 to 24 months. I think everything in the government takes a really long time, and that's just my experience of it. But I think the governments have felt a need post-COVID to appreciate and work on these digital formats.
Thanks. Johannes, 12 months, 18 months, 5 years, 10 years?
I think I would also rather go for 5 years plus, because sure, there's a lot of innovative brains around SSI currently, because it's also closely related with blockchains, but it's much more difficult to raise money in order to follow all these thoughts. And there's also a larger need to integrate with legacy systems and with legacy trust frameworks. And by experience, it takes a long time to integrate with these systems. And it's much harder to build up an independent solution that's highly innovative and that makes things easier, but that also is compatible with the existing solutions. And so I think bridging the X509 CA-based identity framework and PKIs with the more innovative SSI frameworks, I think that will be very challenging.
Thanks, Johannes. Barry, just give me the months. How many months?
5 to 7 years.
Okay, so I think we are a long way to go. So, ladies and gentlemen, like all our viewers and speakers, thanks a lot for joining us today for another great event on like blockchain SSID on blockchain and data security on blockchain, right? And please don't forget to like RSVP or sign up for our next big event, like German Blockchain Award 2021, which is in 2 weeks exactly. So we still have some tickets available. It's of course free, but support your place. Reserve your place. And of course, you can see we have like a big name coming from the blockchain and crypto industry as a jury members. And we have also like top-notch startup who are competing. So thanks a lot all the speakers here and audience as always, and stay tuned and follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter, and see you at our German Blockchain Award 2021. Have a nice evening. Thanks a lot. Stay safe. Bye-bye. Take care.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Bye.